Hope everybody is dry and staying out of the weather today, if at all possible. It's a little wet out there. Appreciate very much everybody joining us today. We have a very interesting conversation to have with our guest, Tom Sleight. We'll be bringing him up live here in just a second. For those that don't know me, I'm Jay Madison. I'm the Jefferson County Agricultural Coordinator here at Jefferson County Economic Development. Jefferson County Economic Development, for folks that don't know, we are the county's umbrella economic development agency serving all of the industries from agriculture up through to manufacturing. So if you happen to be looking for a good place to put a business, come see us. We'd love to talk to you. A little shameless plug there. But anyways, really appreciate everybody joining us today, and want to thank Marshall Weir, who's actually sitting across the table from me. He's the guy who's making sure that we stay live here this afternoon. So why are we doing the Farmers Luncheon series, The Path to 2025? We were scheduled to hold our annual meeting here in November. We had to cancel that because of the COVID-19 pandemic concerns for safety for everybody. And we thought, you know what, we have Farmers Luncheons during the wintertime live. Why not turn those into a webinar series with the idea of talking about what we should be thinking about and how we should be looking towards the future of agriculture. So that's why we're putting this series together. We have a really great lineup, and we're really excited about the guest we have today. Before I introduce Tom, though, I want to thank our sponsors, Midway International Logistics, over there on Bradley Street, excuse me, here in Watertown. Great Lakes Cheese Company down in Adams, the Development Authority of the North Country, Afgratech, manufacturers of AminoMax, National Grid Energy Efficiency and Economic Development Programs, the American Dairy Association Northeast, Converse Laboratories, Lundy Group of Companies, and Jefferson County Farm Bureau. So thank you to all of them for helping make this series possible. We really appreciate their help. Before we get to Tom, just want to let you know that we've got a great lineup of presenters coming this fall. We're working on the September date where we have an organization that we're talking to. We haven't been able to confirm that yet. But then when we get into October, we will have, just flip over to my sheet so I make sure I get these all right. In October, on October 22nd, we will have Dr. Cheryl Mitchell from Steuben Foods. She's going to be discussing plant-based beverages and meat substitutes. So that'll be an interesting conversation, maybe a little bit controversial, we'll see. But looking forward to talking with Dr. Mitchell from Steuben Foods. On November 19th, we'll have Dr. Frank Mittliner, who's known as the greenhouse gas guru. He's from University of California, Davis, and he'll be talking about the real impact agriculture has on climate change. Then on December 17th, to round out 2020, thank God it will come to an end, we'll learn about educating the giants of the burger world from Michelle Miller, the Farm Babe. Michelle did a lot of work with Burger King here recently, and we'll be hearing from her on December 17th about her efforts. So we've got a great lineup. Hope all of you will join us for as many of those webinars as you possibly can. During the webinar, if you decide you have a question you'd like to ask our guest, Tom Sleight, there is a Q&A feature down below. You just click on that and put your question in, and I will try to fit those questions in as best I can into our program. So feel free to do that at any time during the program. I also keep an eye on the chat function, but that one's a little bit harder to catch questions coming through. So encourage you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. That would be very helpful. Okay, want to bring Tom. Hopefully he's still there and didn't leave us. Let's see if I can get Tom back up on screen here. Tom, I believe you can start your video, and also if we can get you unmuted here. Let's see if we can get you unmuted there, sir.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted.
Perfect. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much, Tom, for joining us. I'm very happy to introduce to everybody a very good friend of mine, Tom Sleight. We met way back in the days of when you and others were forming the New York Farm Viability Institute, which is a great organization still up and running today. Tom just retired back in July of 2019, if I've got that right, Tom.
That's right.
As President and Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. Grains Council, a not-for-profit organization that promotes feed, livestock, energy, food, and industrial uses of coarse grains through cooperative programs with governments, organizations, companies, and farmers in over 50 countries. I'm going to make you sound a little old here, Tom. I hope you don't mind, because you had a 25-year career with U.S. Grains Council. So that was pretty awesome. What's that?
I am old.
You're retired. You get to have fun now, right?
That's right. That's right.
But Tom has spent a lot of time traveling the world, Asia, Eastern Europe, Middle East, China, as part of his role with the Grains Council. Between stints at the council, he worked for the Virginia Department of Agriculture and became the executive director of the New York Farm Viability Institute in 2006. He played a very integral role in getting the institute up and running, and then also helped start the New York Center for Dairy Excellence. Tom was born and raised in New York State. He was the 8th generation on his family's dairy farm down in Dutchess County.
That's right.
Is the farm still up and running?
No, Dutchess County is a little too close to all the suburban growth. So
yeah, it's a little bit of a challenging place to do dairy farming down in Dutchess County.
Yeah.
I think there might still be a few there, but it's...
You can count them on one hand, that's for sure.
Yeah, I bet. And Tom attended Cornell University for both undergraduate and graduate studies in agronomy, ag economics, and international agricultural development. Tom currently resides in Central Virginia with his wife, Jane, and he volunteers for the Cornell University Institute for Climate Smart Solutions. What's that about, Tom?
Well, you know, it's a work that's been going on mainly, if many people know Mike Hoffman. He's created an institute there. It's work that actually got some of its start in the New York Farm Viability Institute, where it's talking to farmers and having them, it's not so much a debate about climate change and how do you adjust to climate change, particularly cropping schemes, farm operations, so forth. And so they've done some really good work on how, you know, that's proceeding and how agriculture is adapting to climate differences and climate changes. Pretty cool stuff.
So very important work. And, you know, we've been talking a lot up here in Jefferson County about the need to do more environmental messaging for the consumers on what agriculture is doing as far as being good environmental stewards. So
that's a global thing, Jay. That's really good to hear that. But I will tell you that is a new trend. We may talk about it later on. But you know, with the advent of COVID, you're hearing a lot more about that kind of sustainability concerns, self-sufficiency concerns from international audiences that we never heard before.
Yeah, it's something we do need to do a lot more work in to get that message out. So glad to hear you're involved in that. We never know, we might call on you in the future for that. Well, want to get into the topic at hand, international trade for agriculture and how it's been impacted by the pandemic, but more importantly, you know, the different trade agreements, looking forward to, what to expect in 5 years and such. The first thing, you've got a pretty good familiarity with agriculture here in New York State. Want to ask you the first question about how important is international trade in agriculture to New York State?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jay, because it's something that, I've run into a lot in my career. And it's not in your face every day. You can't see, hear, and touch agricultural trade, but I always look at the fact that 96% of the world's population lives outside the borders of the United States. Actually, it's 96.4%. So the percentage is actually going up. Live outside the borders of the United States. So if you're producing a crop, any kind of food crop or fuel crop, or a consumable crop by consumers, what happens around the world impacts your business on a daily basis, whether you know it or not. And something that may happen far away will have its impact on Chicago Board of Trade and prices in general. And so it is important, although a lot of farmers, don't see it every day, unless they're sitting on the Mississippi River and watching a barge of their corn going down towards New Orleans. So, but it's a huge impact, and it's something I think all farmers need to monitor and watch. What happens around the world affects them every day.
And I put together a slide here, Tom, and I'm going to attempt to share this with everybody. So bear with me for a second, folks. We'll see if we can pull this one up. And Marshall, would you give me a thumbs up if that is visible? Perfect. That's what I like to see. So just to share with folks, in case you're not aware, the importance of international trade to agriculture here in Jefferson County. Great Lakes Cheese alone is building its business in part by producing a whey permeate. 43 million pounds of permeate to be exact, and that has a value to Great Lakes Cheese of about $10 million. So it's great to see our local dairy manufacturer able to take advantage of international trade. Aviagen Hatchery, which we brought in probably, 15 years ago here to Jefferson County. Most people don't even know it exists. It's over there in our business park off Coffeen Street. They export approximately 300,000 chicks a year, many going into Canada, but some travel down to New York City and hitch a ride on an airplane to destinations all over the world as breeding stock for poultry operations in other countries. Annually, on average, we export about 50 rail cars of corn and 50 rail cars of soybeans. Soybeans probably being the most important commodity export we have directly from our farms. Midway International Logistics, which is an interesting angle on our international trade opportunities here out of Jefferson County. They have over 1,000 tractor trailers a year stopping at their facility with 40 million pounds of poultry products in total that they will provide USDA inspection services for, and then those poultry products are exported into Canada. So Jefferson County's role in international agriculture and international trade, I should say, it continues to grow through the many businesses that we have here in the county. So it's kind of interesting to see that, and a lot of people aren't aware, Tom, of just how much international trade plays a role here in the county.
Yeah, it's not surprising. I mean, again, it pervades throughout the U.S. agricultural economy. Again, servicing a market where 96% of your customers live.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the importance of international trade over the last 10 to 20 years. Has it grown? Has it stayed stagnant, or has it declined for the United States?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Jay. And I thought about this for a long time. And You know, again, I spent the majority of my career with the U.S. Grains Council. I was working with corn, sorghum, and barley, the feed grains. You know, they started themselves back in 1960 because of overburdensome supplies. You know, prices were in the tank, and you know, the feed grain sector at that time knew very well the only way they're going to see market growth is shipping that product overseas, and so they formed the U.S. Grains Council. And when I came back to New York, it really sort of hit me that, you know, like for instance, the dairy industry, I don't think was as focused on exports up until the last maybe 20 years. And so in some respects, the feed grains industry was, you know, had about a 40-year head start on this. But again, I think it depends on commodity, how much they look at the international marketplace, you know, for growth. And so, you know, from fruits and vegetables to soybeans to wheat, you know, it all depends on how much supply they have to deal with, and are they building enough markets domestically? And when those markets dry up, they certainly turn internationally. So I think it's certainly been on the rise over the last 50 years for sure. And right now, I can tell you, interest has never been higher in the feed grain sector anyway in trade. That's one of their number one priority right now, as we've seen some of the, you know, ethanol is starting to plateau a little bit here in the Midwest. They've seen, you know, again, trade as a big sign for growth. And I think you can say the same thing about dairy, about meat exports, about soybeans, the ones I'm most familiar with. So I think right now it is at an all-time high in my career, and interest is rising.
What's been some of the challenges that we've faced in the past? You know, what's kept us from, you know, for example, with dairy, what was the barrier that prevented the dairy industry from seeing that growth in international trade like we're seeing now?
Well, I learned a long time ago not to predict how the dairy industry thinks, but I think it's focus, really. I think it's market access is a big one. And I think that, you know, dairy had some issues there, you know, going back, you know, 10, 20 years on market access. Competitiveness, for sure, that's a big deal. Value of the dollar, that's the kind of thing that, pops up a lot. But again, I think familiarity with the U.S. as a supplier, you know, knowing your seller, and, you know, the outreach in the world. I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, you always like to buy, you know, something from someone you know. And I think, you know, reaching out into the international marketplace sometimes is the biggest challenge. Just getting yourself known, and getting yourself known that you're, you know, U.S. is a reliable supplier of that particular commodity. That's a big one. And so, you know, there's a lot of different reasons, you know, weather, all these kinds of things come together. But, you know, I think, you know, again, market access and knowing your customer are the biggest ones.
How you know, how do you go about, you know, for example, you know, I'm trying to come up with a good example here. How do you get yourself into that market? Is, you know, how do you become part of, you know, international trade,
right,
from an agricultural perspective?
Right. Again, not a great question. Not surprising that you have great questions.
Careful.
I always tell my two sons that the world belongs to those who show up. And so just getting out there and being present in the global marketplace. Now, I think a lot of commodities, well, you may not possibly realize this, but, you know, since basically the 1959, I think the act was passed. It goes back to the, I can't remember right now. I think, you know, but anyway, it doesn't matter. U.S. Department of Agriculture created a program called the Cooperator Program, which the organization I work for, U.S. Grains Council, has been a cooperator since 1960. And so what it is sort of it was a cost-sharing program where, you know, if the farmers of that particular commodity, you know, came up with X amount of resources, it was matched by, you know, government cost share to have that global presence. And it's been a very effective program. I think there's about 70 plus participants from any commodity you can think of, from Alaskan seafood to cranberries, to dairy, to corn, to, you name it. And so, there's a way for producers to get present in the marketplace through that program, and or just stepping on a plane and going out and meeting with customers. But again, I think a lot of folks don't realize there's this big network of producer organizations that are well represented around the world. That again, the world belongs to those who show up. You got to be there. You got to shake some hands. You got to meet people, and again, prove that you're a reliable supplier.
I know some of our wineries up here in the North Country, as they were getting established, they made some efforts to get into the global market. I don't know if any still are trying to access global markets, but I know there was some challenges because, as you've indicated, you're competing against the rest of the world to get your product into those particular areas. Like Hong Kong was one in particular for the wineries.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I know some of the people that work in that program. I'll just give you a little anecdote, some of the problems you can run into. Virginia was trying to sell their wine, $25 a bottle wine to the Japanese, high-end customers. And they had this, bottle of wine that was highlighting Thomas Jefferson. They said, oh, look, here we go, Thomas Jefferson heritage, the United States. And they go, who's Thomas Jefferson? Has no real meaning there. So you have to make sure you understand, learn about the market, understand, how you need to modify your product or what type of approach you need to the marketplace. And wine has had its troubles because of competitiveness, but I think they have started to find their niches around the world where there is an interest in U.S. wines. And, again, you just have to keep at it. This success does not happen overnight.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to switch gears a little bit on you here, Tom. We're going to bring it up to the present day and talk about the Trump administration. We've seen since the president was even during his 2016 campaign, he talked about international trade and seemed to be making that a priority. Has any of that work, and I think I know the answer to this, but I want to hear from you, has any of that work of the Trump administration actually benefited agriculture?
Yeah, I think they've been very active. And when you look at the various trade agreements, I think that they got out of the gate kind of slowly. And on the trade side, I mean, one of the problems I was fighting early on was, comments that would offend, global customers. I think we got past that, and then they started to develop a good track record. U.S. MCA, that's a great accomplishment. It's something that was needed. Two of our most important global customers, Mexico and Canada, we had to have an updated agreement with them, and we got that. And there was, I participated in those negotiations, and it was a very painstaking process because there's so many different things that had to be covered. But everybody stuck to it because they realized the importance of it. You're seeing right now a lot of talk about the phase one agreement with China, and China is buying a lot of U.S. commodities right now. Very aggressive pace. And so, and we needed that. We were shut off from the Chinese market here when back 3 or 4 years ago, we were shut out completely for the products I was representing. But we started to get after those issues that were problems with the Chinese, particularly things like genetic engineering, things like that. And so we got those things negotiated. Now they're back to realizing where economics sort of takes over, that China needs these products and they're buying them, again, at a very aggressive pace. I have to see how long this continues. There's a lot of doubt what it's going to be. But, for particular commodities, I know meats are doing well, corn is doing well, soybeans is doing well, wheat's doing well, dairy is doing well. Those are the ones just off the top of my hat with the phase one agreement with the Chinese. The Japanese had not a trade agreement, it's called a comprehensive agreement with Japan. Again, Japan, a very hugely important customer for U.S. product. And so, there was needed because there were certain things Japan was doing policy-wise that was, limiting access for products. And so those are cleaned up. And again, things like there was a problem on dairy that was cleaned up. There was a problem on meat was cleaned up. Things like that. So, but it's a comprehensive agreement, so it hasn't really gone far enough. So it needs to add, some more negotiations are needed there, because it's not a full free trade agreement with Japan, but very important.
Are there, Tom, I apologize for interrupting.
Go ahead.
Are there any countries, any blocks of countries, if you will, that we don't have a good trade agreement with, that we need to negotiate something? Is there a piece that we're missing here?
Right on the wheelhouse there, Jay. Yeah. I would say right off the bat, Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia demand is growing by leaps and bounds. They've had very aggressive economic growth, and it has become, they've sort of waken up. Vietnam has woken up from a 70-year slumber, with their the communist government there, and they've realized that they need to reach out into the world marketplace, and they have. Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Myanmar, formerly known as Burma, places like this, Malaysia, I said Malaysia, but it is a huge marketplace. It is probably the #1 marketplace, aggressively growing market for dairy products right now. And for feed grain products, it's the same sort of thing. It's sort of the best new market we have out there. So Southeast Asia for sure. United Kingdom, that has a lot of importance for processed products, high value exports. Wine, there's a good example there, but also dairy. We need to have something going in there. European Union, a lot of big problems with them. That needs to be taken care of. And then there's one FTA in Africa, Kenya, but we could use a little bit more emphasis on Africa, because again, you have the population and economic dynamics there in Africa that you've seen in other big countries, big importer countries like Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, albeit, they're probably good, 20, 30, 40 years behind the economic curve, but they're growing and growing quickly.
Well, that's good information. I was just checking our list of participants to see if we had any of the elected officials on. I don't see anybody on there, but hopefully when this is over and we send out the recording, maybe we can get some of them to watch this and learn from Tom Sleight what we should be working on. So
yeah,
they'll benefit from your wisdom, Tom. Going to pivot to a question. Actually, this was submitted from Ron Robbins, who is a member of the Jefferson County Ag Development Council, and he was asking about the recent flooding in China, coupled with the trade deal with China. Will that impact our ability to sell agricultural commodities into China in the coming months? And you might have partially answered that, but let's revisit that. What do you see there, Tom?
Sure. Well, a lot of people have been watching the floods in China. I talked to our representative in China. He works for us there, obviously Chinese citizen. I asked him a little bit about this, and the first thing he said to me, we have floods all the time in China. This one's big. It's definitely big, but the good part of it is in the central and southern part of China, and it's not affecting the main population areas, which are sort of wrapped around the coast. So it's not really affecting the main population areas, and there has been a lot of damage in more rural communities, been substantial damage there. But the Chinese keep saying it's under control, which you can either take with a grain of salt or what. But it's certainly they're managing it. They're watching the Three Gorges Dam. The dam is designed to take the type of pressure it's getting right now. So far, it's holding. A lot of the grain companies I've talked to have sort of say, well, it's not going to really affect the grain trade. And if you look at current numbers, it's not. I mean, China is aggressively buying grain. They're aggressively buying meat. And they may possibly buy more, because one of the areas where this flood is affecting is right where right near where the COVID-19 thing started. The Wuhan area, it's near there. So that the communities that are affected by that and are getting a double dose with some of this flood water. So yeah, I mean, China is definitely buying commodities. They're buying consumer products. And again, they've been on a very strong buying binge, and you know, exports are up big time in certain commodities, not all commodities, but certain commodities to China. You know, I did reach, you know, China do have a, you know, solution to these flood waters. They're going to divert some of those waters to Sackett's Harbor to take so maybe minimize the damage. But seriously, I think it's you know, they're handling it. It is having an impact on trade in terms of they need more meat. You know, between that and the African swine fever things, there have been a lot of heavy emphasis on meat and dairy product imports. Cheese is up to China. Cheese export to China really strong right now. So, you know, again, for China, you know, we have a lot of problems with China, politically, economically, a lot of different problems with China. But to ignore a population of 1.4 billion people, it's a very important marketplace for U.S. agricultural products right now. And so we hope that we can have, you know, some good discussions and negotiations to kind of work out our problems, because the needs addressed. I mean, the Chinese are interested in having a relationship, an economic and political relationship, stable economic political relationship with the U.S. And I think the U.S. is, you know, knows that the Chinese and the U.S. economy are very strongly intertwined. So this is going to be a big issue to watch. I mean, it really doesn't matter, you know, who wins the election. What happens on the U.S. relationship with China and its concurrent effect on trade is going to be a big issue for now. And I've always said, even for my grandson. So,
which I'm going to ask a follow-up question. You know, you've obviously worked with China quite a bit on international trade issues. How much can we trust their information on commodity stockpiles?
Well, I'll tell you a little story on that one.
Okay.
You know, official Chinese, you know, grain storage is a state secret. You know, stocks of grain in China are a state secret. And I was traveling, you know, around China. We were in the grain production areas up in Jilin province, and we were going along down the road, and all of a sudden we saw, you know, grain silos off to the side. And I'd never seen you know, kind of like a, you know, storage depot almost. You know, these weren't very big, you know, just sort of like oversized, you know, grain bins, you know, over to the side. And I said, can we just go and take a look around? And, you know, again, the fellow that works for us there in China, he was kind of like a little bit nervous, you know. I said, oh, okay, we go in, you know, just for a little bit. So we went in and started looking around, and looking up, you know, all in all, because I'd never seen an actual Chinese storage facility. And he was, you know, our employee there was really nervous, really nervous. Okay, let's go, time to go, let's go. And so after about, you know, 5 minutes, okay, we got the message and we got back in the van. We went back to our hotel, and I left the country about 3 or 4 days later. About 3 or 4 days after that, your office and this particular employee got a little visit from the state security people. They said, what were you doing over there? And he was in some serious trouble, particularly for being there, and in particular letting you know, a foreigner, Guilo, on there. And you know, he worked out of the issue. I mean, it was negotiated. He didn't get arrested, but so yeah, I mean, speculating on China's grain stocks or stocks of anything is an art form. When I was with the council, we used to have a yearly survey where we'd take experts from around the world and go through China, drive around China, look at the fields, and try to make an educated guess what the crop was going to be, what the stocks were. But it's all an educated guess. So you just have to kind of watch, relatively speaking, comparatively speaking. But, you know, we never have trusted those numbers as absolute. No way.
You know, we've talked a lot about China. What about Russia? Are they anywhere near the trading partner of China? And are the problems the same? Or the opportunities, I should say. Make it a positive question.
Yeah, Russia is, I think, again, depends on the commodity, Jay. I mean, I used to spend a lot of time in Russia. I was assigned in that part of the region. I was working there when Russia was the #1 market for U.S. corn. Now you can make the, you know, do the math on that. But anyway, and so it was a huge market back then. but then it disappeared. Domestic production increased, and the Russian economy improved when things broke down. Hang on, let me get rid of the phone call here. Okay, sorry about that.
Not a problem.
It's a problem with the Zoom call. And so for certain commodities, yes, it's a good market for chicken, for poultry products. It was a fabulous market. Processed foods, there's really a strong fascination with American brands in Russia, particularly things like wine, cigarettes, tobacco. It's a great market. But it is a complex market, and it's one that, with Russia's shenanigans in the Crimea, actually the U.S. companies have really been forbidden from working there, from spending money there. Not that you're forbidden from traveling there, but, for instance, when I mentioned before, these agricultural organizations that, develop money or develop trade through using some federal matching funds, they're not allowed to spend any of those funds in Russia. So I think it is a much more complex market because it's one that's hard to figure out. Same sort of issue with statistics there, although they're much better. But again, they are very good, loyal customers once you get into the, get to know them and get into the marketplace, and they get to respect your product. So it's a different market. All markets are different in slight ways, but it's hard to compare China and Russia.
Okay. Just want to make a note. We've been joined as one of the guests by Assemblyman Mark Walczyk. He's an assemblyman in northern Jefferson County and covers parts of St. Lawrence County. So just want to send a shout out to the assemblyman for joining us. Hopefully he's been able to pick up some good information from you, Tom, that he can use here for New York State.
All right.
Let's see. Next question that I wanted to ask. I just want to make sure that I miss anything. Another question that came through was about if we were to have a crash in the US dollar, how do you see us recovering financially, and how would that impact our trade relations abroad?
Yeah, it's always something everyone watches. Right now, the biggest problem we have trade-wise is the strength of the dollar. When the dollar is weak, exports go up. I mean, that's a economic maxim. And so a weak dollar helps exports. And so right now, it depends. Again, depends on country to country, whether the country pegs their currency to the U.S. dollar or they don't. Economic strength, what's going on in the U.S. economically, so forth and so on. I mean, still right now, U.S. economic growth has been strong, globally, relative to the global marketplace. And so one of our bigger problems right now is the growing strength of the U.S. dollar. So, I'm not necessarily fearful of a dollar when it drops. I think dollar crashing, I just don't think that's ever going to happen. I think too much of the global economy, relies on the dollar and has a vested interest in the U.S. economy and the dollar having a certain amount of strength. So I think it's something that, we always do watch. And you have to do a lot of good math to make sure how competitive your product is, vis-a-vis its price and the currency rate. And a lot of times we work with countries on how to manage currency rate fluctuations. And the sophisticated buyers do a really good job of that. So I don't think it's a big concern, more of a concern on the dollar getting too strong.
Okay. I just want to take a moment to remind the audience that you can submit questions. We strongly encourage that you participate in this. Just go to the bottom of your screen, at least I believe it'll be on the bottom of your screen, the Q&A button. You click on that, and then you can type in your question and hit submit, and that'll pop up on my screen so that I can pose those to Tom, and he really appreciates really difficult, hard questions.
That's right.
So
bring it on.
I've tried not to throw too many softballs at you. Hopefully a couple of them were challenging.
Very good.
But you've been doing a great job answering them. Okay, so let's start to pivot now to the pandemic and what that has done both here in the United States and then internationally. How has the pandemic affected international trade, especially in regards to agriculture, or has it? Has it not had any impact?
Oh, it's definitely had an impact, Jay, both positive and negative. It has, for instance, a lot of the pandemic concerns, I think, again, like I said this before, meat trade has had some nice growth. Dairy, feed grain exports are up. Business has continued, export business has continued. I think the biggest change has been, the changes we see here in the United States. Consumers' consumption patterns are changing with the pandemic. And I'll give you a quick, for instance, with meat, Japan was traditionally a great market for U.S. beef. And a lot of that beef would end up in high-end restaurants in Japan. Well, just like here in Watertown, people aren't going to restaurants like they used to, and particularly in Japan. And so that high-end trade just, plummeted. But other trade has gone in to take its place because they need other products, lower quality cuts, things like that. That's picked up. And so you see that same thing happening all around the world. Well, where in some cases, the higher end products are going down. In other cases, they've gone up. Here, another good example is on energy. We were nice growth, particularly in China, on actually importing ethanol.
From the U.S.?
From the U.S., yes. And other countries as well. But, again, driving miles are dropping like a rock. And so, and where we had aggressive, ethanol exports, they've sort of moderated down to, a lower level. We're still exporting it, but it's dropped. So, what's happening in the world, the same thing's happening in the U.S. Consumer preferences are changing. I think I mentioned it early in the show, Jay. One thing that we've seen pop up is growing concern about food self-sufficiency about countries with the pandemic. How self-sufficient are we? Are we too reliant on trade and sustainability? We hear that so much more this year than we've ever heard in the past. People asking those questions, well, if I'm relying on you as a supplier, how sustainable are you as a supplier, and moving forward? You hear those questions a lot more now than you ever did before.
We've certainly seen that here in the U.S. Concerns have developed about the food system was very resilient. It did better than I actually expected as far as disruptions and such went. But at the same time, it's caused us to ask questions, and we'll use the meat industry as an example. What happens in the future if we start to lose those major meat processing plants for a significant amount of time? What do we do?
That was a big concern internationally too. What was happening with those processing plants? They paid attention to that really closely. So.
So the next question is obviously we've got a presidential election going on.
What?
And not putting you on the spot to choose one or the other. We won't do that to you. But whoever that person is that takes office in 2021, what would be your advice for them on how to grow agriculture, looking at it in that international perspective? What should they be doing to position us to grow agriculture here in the U.S.?
Yeah, good question, Jay. The thing I've always done with each change of administration when I was working in Washington is you spend a lot of time in the first, 100 days, let's just say, reminding the administration how important international trade is to U.S. agriculture. And it's the same sort of thing here. You just have to continue to remind, the administration staying engaged, like I mentioned earlier, that 96% of the population lives overseas, that sort of thing. But that U.S. agriculture is dependent on, stable international trade. It's very, very important. I mean, both parties back in the last election were opposed to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This was, 12 countries, throughout the Asia-Pacific region. We really blew an opportunity by pulling out of that agreement. And so things like that, again, both parties were opposed to that. So I'm not laying any blame here, but we really blew a chance there. And so actually, there's a lot of talk now about putting agreements like that back on the table. Something like the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas. That's something that was like 10, 15 years ago. You heard about that, but one thing I didn't mention in global impact of the COVID is that Latin American countries are really hurting bad with COVID-19. Their economies are crashing. They're having a lot of struggles in controlling the disease. I talked to our staff down in that services are part of the region. They're not even allowed out of their apartment, but 2 days a week. And so there's real problems there. So you sort of have to look about, well, how are we going to re-engage with countries around the world that are really having trouble here, that were great markets for U.S. agriculture. So, staying engaged internationally is important to stress with the administration. It is the future for U.S. agriculture. I'm reminded of that constantly. And again, that people understand that. I've had people, in the current administration say, Tom, yeah, I get it. You stop nagging me about it. I get it. It's important. It's that sort of reaction that we want to get with whomever is coming into the new administration, and some of the change over the administration. You get a lot of new people too. You always got to watch out for that.
Right. We've had a question submitted, Tom, by Assemblyman Walczyk. He's asking, agriculture accounts for approximately 70% of water use. What, if anything, are we seeing or are you seeing around the world to restrict, reduce, regulate water usage? How is that playing a role in agriculture?
Yeah, terrific question. It's been a huge topic globally, and everyone says the next big conflict we're going to have in the world is going to be over water. And in a lot of respects, you have to look at U.S. agriculture as, in many respects, we're exporting water, because we have those plentiful, abundant water resources here in the country, and things like grain and meat. The water, dairy, water dependent. And so, yes, countries recognize that. For instance, like Saudi Arabia had a very strong program to develop their own dairy industry, their own grain production, and they jettisoned it because it is inefficient use of water in their own country. And they know that they can do it much more efficiently by buying those products on the international marketplace and basically importing the water rather than using their own, fossil water resources. I remember going to Saudi dairy and the water would come out of the well, boiling, things like that. So it is a big question all around the world. China is obsessed with their managing their water correctly. India, same sort of thing. You wonder about that, but it's a country so dependent on monsoons. They watch it every year about what their water resources are going to be like. So I think agriculture is playing a real big part of that. Part of this whole sustainability thing for U.S. agriculture is showing how well U.S. agriculture has managed water resources over, centuries, really, since, we put in the extension service, things like that. And so, and one of the pitches we make to global audiences is that U.S. farmers do a really good job about maximizing production and minimizing inputs of water, fertilizer, et cetera. So it is a constant issue all around the world.
I think if I recall correctly, and forgive me, I haven't looked at this figure in a while, but I believe agriculture here in the U.S. has reduced our water usage by somewhere in the range of 60 to 70% since
it's incredible, Jay.
The 1940s. So
absolutely incredible.
We've really done a good job of reducing our water usage.
And we need to tell that story a lot.
Yeah, a lot more than we are. That's for certain. So the next question is really bringing this back to the local level, because that's, we want to have everybody walk away with something that they can think about how it impacts them. Looking at the impacts of the pandemic, looking at the trade agreements and what the potentials are for the presidential election, which will certainly impact agriculture. what would be your thoughts on how farms should be preparing themselves for 5 years from now? What should their expectations be? And I know that's making you look into a crystal ball, and you know that 5 years right now could be really crazy with the year we've just had.
Yeah.
What would you say to the farmers that are on the webinar right now?
It just so happens I have a crystal ball right here.
I knew I could count on you, Tom.
I always tell people, and farmers particularly, that you must stay nimble. Have your production be able to respond to changes in demand. We did a big study here about 3 years ago about changing demand in various economies, particularly in Asia. The focus was there. And one of the things we found out was demand is diversifying greatly, and that creates niche markets. It creates high volume commodity markets. It creates a lot of different kinds of markets. And being nimble and paying attention to those shifts in the marketplace, particularly things like aging populations and sort of new food trends. Always watch that. How can my operation dovetail in with what's going on globally? So staying nimble and always keeping an eye on your competitiveness, your cost of production. Know that. Really have to, good farmers, the best ones I've seen, always have a really good, handle on what their cost of production is, so they can consider, new operations and be more nimble, and make sure that you're globally competitive, because the floor of competition rises every day in global agriculture, and it's a reality that farmers deal with every day. And I say, stay involved, pay attention to what national organizations are doing and saying. A lot of good folks spending a lot of good time on analyzing these global consumption trends and how farmers can match into that. But I've always felt, we're in a great time for agriculture. I mean, a lot of people are struggling now, but whether it be local orientation, national orientation, or global orientation, these markets are developing, they're expanding, they're diversifying very quickly. So watching those trends and staying nimble is what I always talk to folks about.
Awesome. Tom, anything that we missed that you just feel we really need to get out there in the few minutes we have left?
Nothing other than this has been the greatest interview I've ever had by a radio TV personality in my life. Yeah, sorry, I forgot that last. No, you do a great job, Jay. Very thorough.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. We do have a question that just came in. Curious as to what you think about plant-based protein as a pathway to improve ag exports as well as domestic products.
Yeah, a lot of people spend a lot of time worrying about that and worrying about electric cars and how those are going to impact, consumption. Internationally, I think there has not been any trends on interest in plant-based protein. They're not sold yet. That may happen in the future. I mean, there's organizations that do work on that. I know the soybean folks are doing some work on that, kind of on a preliminary basis, seeing how that plays out. But I don't see this as a trend yet, but, as everything, watch trends and see how they develop. So, it may grow. I do think there's a lot of confidence in the products that the U.S. produces, cost-wise, taste-wise, safety-wise, and so forth. So I think that it's something to always watch, but I don't see it yet. I mean, I see things like aquaculture, expanding much faster, trends like that. So.
Okay, I think that's
the question, but.
I think that answers the question. And for anybody that might not realize what we're talking about, I believe anyways, we're talking about plant-based meat substitutes. That's the way I would take that. Is that your assumption, Tom?
Yeah, that's what I always look at it. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
and just to remind folks that we will have Dr. Cheryl Mitchell from Steuben Foods out. They're located out near Buffalo. She will be our guest on October 22nd. to discuss exactly that topic, plant-based meat substitutes and plant-based beverages, and how those are developing, and what we should be looking for towards the future.
One quick anecdote, Jay, I just read the other day is that these plant-based meats use a lot of coconut oil.
Yes, they
And
do.
it's causing a lot of havoc in coconut production around the world, particularly when you look at places like the Philippines, where that type of production is mainly smallholder. They're having a really hard time keeping up with it. So it's a trend to watch.
And we've got another question, and this might be the last one, unfortunately. We have another question that came in. Do you see a movement toward blockchain in international marketing?
A great question. I was just asked that question yesterday. I was on a discussion with a couple of all of our folks from around the world, and we talked about that. 2 years ago, I would have said, yeah, blockchain is going to be something to watch and watch very closely, particularly in the grain trade. A couple of the big, grain companies took a look at it, and the answer coming around pretty much from all of our folks that work around the world saying, interest is kind of fading there. I'm talking mainly about in ag commodities. I'm not talking about consumer products where I think there's much greater interest in that. They didn't see this as the trend is growing. In fact, we put it as something that we may not need to worry about over the next couple of years because the experience has not been all that fantastic to date in grain trading.
That's surprising. Well, the experience certainly determines what's happening, but I find it surprising that we're not seeing more trends towards using blockchain technology.
When you gotta remember, it's a highly fungible commodity, so that's a big difference than versus some other more consumer-oriented products.
Okay. Well, Tom, that's all the questions I have. I don't have any more from the audience. The questions we've gotten from the audience have been excellent, as always.
Great.
So it's very appreciated. Just before you go, I want to let folks know that, September 24th, we have our next webinar, and we're looking at trying to get a speaker on dealing with change and stress in agriculture as we go through all of these crazy times, how to survive all of that, which is definitely a good topic. October 22nd, as I mentioned, Dr. Cheryl Mitchell from Steuben Foods will be joining us to talk about the growth of plant-based meat substitutes and plant-based beverages. On November 19th, we'll have Dr. Frank Mittliner, the greenhouse gas guru from UC Davis, will be talking about the real impact of agriculture in climate change. And then on December 17th, we'll have Michelle Miller, the farm babe, will be joining us to help us learn about how she educated the giants of the burger world about what the reality of agriculture is. And so really appreciate having that lineup. Tom, again, thank you very much for joining us today. You do a great job. Thank you very much, sir.
Always a pleasure, Jay. Always a pleasure talking to you.
All right, folks, remember the folks that are going through the challenges out there dealing with the pandemic. Also, the folks trying to recover from the Duraco, I want to make sure I pronounce it right, that hit the Midwest. That was pretty devastating. And now, certainly, what folks are going through with Hurricane Laura. If you have the opportunity to help any of those folks out, please do so. In the agricultural world, that's usually not an issue. Usually folks are stepping forward before people even have the chance to think about what help they need. But please, if you see an opportunity, take advantage of that. We really appreciate you joining us here. And Tom, again, you have a fantastic day, sir. Everybody have a fantastic day. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.